Hey everybody, we're back. We've been having some technical difficulties connecting to the stream tonight, so we'll just give a quick recap and get things rolling. So essentially, we're going to be talking about our very eerie book tonight, and I hope you join us on YouTube if you want to watch some of our past broadcasts, or if you're watching this broadcast on YouTube. Leave us some comments on YouTube. Check out Audible as well for your audiobook needs. You can go to dmstable.com/audible for a free 1-month trial. And of course, we have some music from Incompetech that we play on every stream because Incompetech is awesome. And finally, if you're a Patreon, you get to vote on what book we do next, and that vote ends at 8:45. So if you do want to vote, you do have time to join us at Patreon and vote. Or if you just want to vote for next time, the next session's voting will begin shortly after the broadcast. So without further ado, Alex, tell everybody about the book we're going to be talking about.
All right, welcome back to episode 2 of the 800s. Tonight we'll be discussing our first short story. That's The Tomb, a fictional short story written in 1917 by H.P. Lovecraft. Its Dewey Decimal designation is 813.52. It tells the tale of Jervis Dudley from his own point of view as he becomes obsessed with the mausoleum next to the home in which he grew up. His initial curiosity is thwarted by a padlock, of all things, but upon several years' return, Jervis finds his way cleared. What lies in wait for him in this mysterious tomb? Treasures or terrors?
Probably more terrors. So if you are joining us live, make sure you comment in the stream chat. We do watch that, and we like discussing things with just more than myself and Alex here. So throw us a comment, and we'll throw one right back at you. But otherwise, we're going to be talking about some different aspects of the book and our impressions of it. And then we'll have a few things at the end to wrap up. So, Alex, if you want to disclaim anything.
As Adam was hinting at, we do have a couple minor disclaimers. This show is geared towards adults. There are, generally speaking, probably going to be adult themes that we discuss. And while we are not going to rely on it heavily, there is probably going to be swearing involved. So if you have kids around, feel free to welcome them, but at your own discretion. And also, we're trying to create a supportive community of people who get to share interests and things that they love and hobbies and such here at DM's Table and the 800s. So please be nice or fuck off.
Succinctly put, Alex. Without further ado, let's dive right into the book, The Tomb by H.P. Lovecraft. So, Alex, what were your first impressions of The Tomb?
Well, my first impressions were I was surprised at how poetic it was in the way that it was initially read. That might have had something to do with the audiobook I was listening to. The person who was reading it was very good with their meter and timing, but I think it more did justice to the actual writing than it was deliberately adding poetry to something that wasn't there. And by poetic, I'm not talking like meter and rhyme. I'm more so talking about traditional storytelling poems, like think Homeric tradition, or even close, probably a lot closer to what this is close, Edgar Allan Poe's type of works. What about yours, Adam?
Well, I gotta say, you definitely know poetry a lot better than I do, because I can't point at poetry and be like, yes, that's the style that is. Yes. But for me, this book was, right off the bat, I mean, it's a very short book. Obviously, it's about 26 minutes of audio. Some narrators do about 28, but still less than 30 minutes total of just talking, which is a very, very short book. So for like just the beginning, very similar to other H.P. Lovecraft books, he just kind of smacks you with the book, or he just whap, gets you going. And for me, that is something that I'm not really used to in a novel and or a novella, really. So it took me by it took I was very off guard by it, and I found myself having to focus to make sure I paid attention. But that's just the beginning, and once things get rolling, you understand like the voice that Lovecraft is trying to portray, and you do get sucked in once he picks you up. It's just a matter of getting into that current, right?
Yeah, you have to kind of take it in stride in a different way than a traditional book. Uh, I have a little experience not just with poetry but with short stories, and short stories kind of have to do that. And he has a way, like you said, of just kind of smacking you in the face with everything all at once. So you really have to invest yourself in the beginning to follow through to the end, and it's worth doing. But I'm sure you probably had to do something similar. I had to listen to the beginning of it 2 or 3 times to really get myself in that headspace.
Yeah, kind of like what V.S. Drake said. For me, what really did it was I gave up the audiobook and I pulled it up on my computer. It's freely available. Obviously, H.P. Lovecraft is long gone. May he rest in peace. But hplovecraft.com has all of his works. So I pulled it up there, and I don't know, something about just being able to visualize that intense flowing of long words. um, that really did it for me. Plus that cool little quote at the beginning, the "Sedibus ut saltem placidus in morte quiscem." Uh, I swear I'm gonna get it right one of these times. But
I
that
mean,
that just strikes harder seeing it for me. So
yeah, I actually did something similar when right before the stream. Actually, I took the chance to actually read it on top of having listened to it. And I think you're right. There are certain parts of it that were made to be visually read. Like that's part of the experience, and it's a very different experience to listen to it. And there's some parts that verbally sound very cool that you don't necessarily get quite as profoundly in your head. So this is actually an interesting story that I really liked being able to read it both ways before the stream, like multiple times, and it was worth doing in those different ways because you got something different out of it, which I think speaks to the writing ability.
yeah, kind of riffing into the writing ability comment there. Um, so for so one thing I noticed, which isn't usually the case, but it might be because it's an older book thing, but man, a lot of those words in this book were like I've never seen them before.
There was a fair amount of that for me too, where I had to do some looking up. I know that is kind of a feature of some older books that come from that turn of the century era because you're just coming out of Victorian era literature. So there's just a lot of things that they use to reference certain themes or architecture or what have you that we just don't use even colloquially nowadays. So yeah, come prepared with a dictionary or dictionary.com when you read this book,
That's
which is
that's great.
great. But honestly, and I'd like to hear some other people's thoughts on this because I thought this is one of the things that I think didn't work for the book was I thought it came off as a little bit pretentious, not just because of the big words, but because in the very beginning of the book, the guy basically says, "If you don't believe me, you're dumb," because I can sense something that you can't, and only those of us who are at this higher level of uh, understanding of the universe could possibly get this, or at least you have to accept it or you're dumb.
Well, that was the voice of the character, right? Is I'm not insane. I'm just smarter than you. So that's something that I personally I liked that he worded things a little bit more in a huffy, convoluted way, just to get that voice across of like this is somebody who is of higher intelligence, but his sanity is in question.
Yeah, and I think that's a major theme throughout the book is that idea of questioning one's sanity based on perceptions of reality.
Yeah.
It, he even questions his own sanity, which, if we look at it like one of the more common terms of phrase when it comes to mental illnesses, they're not crazy if they know they're crazy. And I wonder how much he's playing into that sort of idea. But he also, as V.S. Drake noted, he specifically leaves stuff out, and it's unclear as to whether or not that's intentional or unintentional.
Yeah. Yeah, like
And
something I noticed about like leaving stuff out is this story is about the tomb, the mausoleum that he finds in the woods, um, that Jervis Dudley finds in the woods. And I felt like he went into exquisite detail about the door to the tomb, the surroundings of the tomb, the rusty iron chain on the tomb, the fact that he sticks the candle in and he can see just this little stone stairway heading down. Like there's all these details specifically impacting the tomb, and everything else is just kind of, grayscale. And to me that kind of has a double impact, right? Because it focuses your attention on the tomb, and everything else is just kind of, and the sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
it's all right. It happens to the best of us, buddy.
Yeah, it focuses your attention on the tomb, and then wow, I am not getting it back.
Do you mind if I try and fill in? Because I think I know
Yeah,
where
go
you're going
ahead.
with it. It focuses your attention on the tomb and specifically tries to distract you from anything else as if it's not important. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, or like it's drawing in your attention to the tomb as much as the tomb is drawing his attention in on itself. And it's supposed to put into question anything else. It gives a sort of plausible deniability to anything he might get wrong outside of these few specific things that he's going into exquisite, if not excruciating, detail.
Yeah, and like he doesn't see other things. For him, his entire life is that tomb. Everything else is just mundane. So it's kind of a neat way to handle it.
At least in the beginning. I mean, there's a couple other things that he does go into pretty in-depth detail, but they are still related to the tomb, i.e., his little trip through time where he sees that House of the Hydes completely restored to its grandeur, and he's explaining what it's like, not only in like physical detail, but like an emotional experience as well, and as if it's real, or at least that's how he feels when he experiences it. He experiences it as real all the way up through that lightning strike that knocks him out, and it's like the bolt of lightning that knocks him back into reality.
Yeah. So do you think his noticing more of the house was like kind of him getting bored with the tomb and his attention wandering, or do you think it was just an enhancement of his obsession with the tomb?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I'd love to hear what some of our viewers think about that. But I personally, I hadn't thought about that, but I think you might be right there. I think that his distraction from the tomb brought other things into more clarity. And they start to fade out once he finds that key that opens the padlock. And
Right.
I really like that thought that's I hadn't really noticed that until you put that together. And I wonder, though, if part of it is also to do with his acceptance of now's not the time. When he originally approaches the tomb, he remembers his reading of the legend of Theseus, who finds armor and weapons under a rock with which he can slay the Minotaur. And he realizes that, oh, I can't get in now, so now's not the time. So it allows space for other things to come back into clarity. But as soon as he finds that literal key to his potential treasure, his focus, his obsession is right back on the tomb.
Yeah. Which I don't recall the exact pacing, but I think there was a point where it was after he got into the tomb. He kind of had that little tune he sung at breakfast.
Yes.
I'm looking it up right now, but like
That
I
was
really I really liked that as like he got what he wanted, right?
mhm.
He reached his goal, the thing he's been obsessing over this whole time, and it breaks into this euphoria for him. And first he makes some stuff up, but
supposedly make some stuff up. Again, a lot of that gets called into question, but you're right. There is that shift in tone for the entire story, which is pretty macabre and dark. And then it shifts to something surprisingly bright and bouncy. I don't know about you, but like when I was reading it, it definitely is a shift. But when I was listening to it, the person who was reading it read it in such a way that it sounded like one of those like dwarven drinking songs from J.R.R. Tolkien, less
yeah,
so something that belonged in the middle of an H.P. Lovecraft horror novella. And as V.S. Drake noted, one of the other treasures that he uncovered in there is that he started learning new things. And I think that was kind of a theme throughout, where H.P. Lovecraft was emphasizing this connection between the death and the past or history, things that we can learn from them, but either we choose not to or don't have the capacity to.
yeah.
And yes, it does sound fairly schizophrenic in a way. Uh,
So
in
how do you think he picked up the new things then?
Well, I assume that it might be something that he had picked up through any amount of reading or uh, just subconsciously picked it up and it just became clear. He was able to put things together with probably some highly educated guessing. Again, we're assuming that we're taking this as a fictional story written by somebody who believes something that isn't true. But if we take it in the other direction where we believe what they're saying, then he frankly got it from listening to the dead.
Yeah,
So, but I think that's one of the things that he's specifically inviting us to do is to question which of those points it is. Is it that unhinged lunatic, or is it just somebody who happens to have a perception of the world that we don't? Yeah,
yeah. And as V.S. Drake said about like the family library, Jervis mentions early on that he likes to read. So for me, I think what likely happened was he got bored. Found some old novels in the house near the tomb. Read up some stuff, picked up some random knowledge, but he stayed up all night and got super sleep deprived and totally forgot that that's where he got it. And it wasn't the voices telling him, it was the books that he read. So.
Yeah, and you said this wasn't entirely relatable. Honestly, it's as much as it is fun to justify the non-fictional potential answer for this. I do like taking a step to to at least ponder what it would be like if it were true that he got this knowledge and had this fascination with death in the past because of something that we would consider supernatural. What would it be like to live in a very realistic world if you did have those proclivities and sensitivities to uh, death and the beyond? I mean, there's a lot of people who have that fascination with it to this day, and there's plenty of people who claim to have connections to spirits and the next life, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah.
And especially back then, again, if we're thinking context, like even seeming like you have that connection is enough to warrant isolation in their society, and it probably would do the same nowadays, like if it were true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as V.S. Drake said, it's giving uh, it allows him a certain insight into things like death and the process of it that freaks people out, especially because others don't have those sensitivities. And again, it's kind of where that slightly pretentious nature comes from as well. But I kind of like how it was used to kind of make you think about both sides of the coin. What is it like from the people who experience what we typically view as reality versus those who experience these deeper sensitivities, and and how do those things reconcile or not reconcile at all?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. We've kind of touched on it already, but what themes do you think were strongly painted in this story?
Well, as you said, we've kind of touched on a couple of them already. Insanity and obsession and how those two things intertwine are huge themes throughout this book as to where's the line between them. Uh, and do we have to question our own? Are we the only ones who have the capacity to question our own insanity or our sanity? And I think that another major one is just our fascination as a human species with the dead, with the beyond, what comes next, and our connections to it. Even if you're
Yeah.
not one of the people who can sense that, there's plenty of people who spend their whole lives fascinated by it and reading into it and trying to find that connection. And this is coming from one of those people who has it and sees it as a gift, but it has become a curse in his life. And
Yeah, I definitely think you're onto something there, especially with uh, Jervis mentioning later in the story that he might be an ancient descendant of the what was it, the Hydes?
yeah,
It was
he
the
was
tomb.
the reincarnation of Jervis Hyde,
Yeah,
actually. I believe he finds out in the end because the tomb encased in the mausoleum, like one of the coffins in there, had his first name on it.
yeah. I'm thinking
And
more
when
like he feels like he's connected to them on a biological level, so he kind of looks for additional connections, I think, in the book because he feels like he should have that connection.
Yeah, and I think part of that is driven by this idea that you don't really find it out till the end, but it's driven by this idea that he is this reincarnation. So it's not necessarily a drive that's his alone. It's the drive of somebody who is still connected to that world from the past, i.e., that Jervis Hyde. And he is kind of processing it as if it's his own revelation when it's not entirely his own, but neither were any of the other gifts or information that he obtained through this sensitivity either. It was all stuff that he had obtained from the past.
Yeah. Was there anything else that spoke to you about that, or?
Well, I was a little bit disturbed by some of it. Again, like I like the use of going back and forth between the stuff that is him and the stuff that's from the past and the stuff that is um, from another world. It's fun to read, but if you try to put yourself in that mindset, it is a mind fuck beyond all belief.
That's definitely true. I think that's just a H.P. Lovecraft thing. All right.
Well, in my experience, yeah, that is, but it's a theme nonetheless that I I like that he does it because not a lot of other people try to mess with you in that way. But I just, if you kind of have to understand that that's something you're going to encounter. It's meant to mess with you a little bit, especially if you like to empathize with characters or put yourself in their shoes. Like his whole idea is to like make you question something about yourself through these characters,
Yeah.
like on a fundamental level, and it
Or
gives
or at
gives
least
me the
question
heebies.
or at least question reality, right?
Yeah, something like that. You know, just question the fabric of the cosmos.
Yeah. Well,
So,
let's talk plot. Uh favorite plot point. What did you like about the story? What hit for you?
well, I like this idea that it's something that's always been a part of him and he's able to walk away from it, but it pulls him back in. Again, it's this idea that obsession never really leaves when you have the kind of curiosity that some people do, because I'm one of those people where, if curiosity killed the cat and I were a cat, I would be well out of my 9 lives. But so that one, I think that's one of the things that kind of got me to actually empathize with the character, to relate to the character in the story, is like I know what it's like to have to walk away from something because you just don't have the time or you don't have the right information, and then to come back to it all of a sudden out of nowhere and it's an obsession again as if it never left. So I really like that he has to leave the tomb and comes back to it. I also thought it was interesting that he has a connection to this Jervis Hyde that's so deep that he has a full-on hallucination about not only being him and a part of that family, but that it takes something as explosive, literally as a lightning strike, to knock him out of it. And the fact that it all ends where it began, it ends with him being taken away to ostensibly a psych facility of some kind, for because he was screaming and writhing and he was being hauled away for having seen something that was beautiful to him, at least in that moment. Beautiful and then terrible.
But
And
others didn't understand.
yeah, and going through this kind of circular pattern is something I know we see it a lot nowadays between television and games, doing a lot of this start at the end, and the rest is basically a recollection. But I thought it was done very well and kind of sets the tone for the plot moving the way that it does.
Yeah, I liked a lot of the later scenes when he started doing some of the weird, not explainable things. Similar to what V.S. Drake said here. Um, like the cellar scene. So he goes into town and he's like, "Look at this cellar that's right here that nobody knew was there, and I've totally never been here before, but I knew it was there." It's like, how did, assuming we don't believe that the things that he saw happened, how did he know about those things? You're right.
And V.S. Drake actually mentioned that spot in the cellar that nobody remembered, and he actually prompts a pretty good question. Do you think his real name is actually Jervis?
I I never questioned whether or not his name was Jervis, but I guess for me the ending kind of lands that yes, his name is Jervis because um when they see the name on the coffin, the reaction is, "Oh, wow, that's creepy." But like, I don't know if his name wasn't really Jervis, if he like changed it to fit, then I don't think the creep factor is there. So,
Well, the thing is that we don't know, and just to play devil's advocate on him potentially having that name, is it could be a name that he, because of what he saw, because of his entering the tomb, like we don't know that his name was always Jervis. We really don't. It could be something that he only chose after his hallucination. After he entered the tomb, and to say rather than being the reincarnation was maybe possessed by the spirit of Jarvis Hyde. So
hmm.
it can still be creepy because it could be, because remember at the beginning we learn his name as he's in the hospital, or as he is, you know, detained after being declared insane. Not so much like this isn't a narrator or third party calling him that. There's nobody else that calls him that except himself. So it
Well,
is not unreasonable to doubt it. And the question of how that name came to be, it's a fun little thought experiment. I mean, I personally think that he probably is, because he does mention that he's related to the Hydes, and like it's not uncommon for people to be named after distant relative, like past relatives, particularly ones that were of note in history, and given the description of the home that they were in at that time when it was at its peak,
yeah.
possibly. Like it doesn't seem unreasonable, but also it isn't unquestionably his actual name.
Yeah, I guess the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, okay, yeah, I can kind of see your point. Like, did he fantasize about this past person named Jervis, and he imagined himself as Jervis, and then that just kind of took over the more and more time he spent there. But one of the points that I wanted to talk about, which uh, really lands the creep factor home, and I'm going to read a quick quote from the book.
Mm-hmm.
In An odd impulse caused me to climb upon the broad slab, extinguish my candle, and lie down within the vacant box, referring to the tomb that we later learn has his name, so on and so forth on it. Uh,
Ooh, boy, that is dark.
I know, right? Like, who who in their right mind goes, "I'm gonna lay in a coffin"?
Well, I think you'd be surprised how many people have that, just like that curiosity about it. I remember I've uh, been a part of planning a funeral before, and admittedly, even myself, when I was in there surrounded by these coffins that people were choosing, I was just like, I wonder what it would be like. I wasn't thinking about the extinguishing the flame part, but I was just like, wonder what it'd be like to rest in this for all of eternity, or at least all of decomposition anyway.
Yeah.
But I so I kind of get that. I kind of get it. It is dark, especially the extinguishing the candle first for whatever reason. But
I think it plays off the same mindset that he has when he first comes across the tomb, right?
mhm.
He comes across the tomb and he goes, "Oh, I've got to go in there." Yeah, I'm going in there. And then he gets in the tomb and he goes, "Oh yeah, that coffin, I'm going in there."
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that it is just this continuation of there's what's the next thing that I am going to be like fascinated by when I'm obsessed with something that's related to the tomb and what's inside of it. And the next progression from the mausoleum is the coffin, really. And you're right, it is just like the next. I hesitate to use the word natural progression, but it is a pretty common theme, at least in my experience, in H.P. Lovecraft's writing, where he wants you to take it to the next step further in not just, I have this vague fascination with this big thing that represents death. We're going to get into like what's it actually like to be there? What is it like to be to want not just be there, but like to feel at home or want to be in that position, and to want to experience something that goes beyond life as we know it, or
Yeah.
as we currently experience it. And I, while I am not sure that I would ever go to that point myself of walking into a mausoleum, I can understand the curiosity of it and the compulsion to know just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think that's what draws me into these books, and that's why I get creeped out by them. It's not like I actually find most of the imagery weird. It's the fact that I can relate to it as much as I can. And what about
Yes.
you?
Um for well, for me this is probably I probably won't think too much about this book after tonight, um, but I re- I don't know. For in the interest of um sorry, my brain is blanking again tonight.
That's all right, man.
um what do you um sorry, give me just a second here.
All right. Well, while Adam is, yeah, while Adam is clearing his head a little bit, Via Straight mentioned or wanted us to talk about whether we believe he actually got in, or to say like his past self from within him. What was your take on like the actual experience of him being in the tomb?
Personally, I don't think he ever made it in. I don't think astral projection or anything. I think any sort of insight he gleamed about the tomb was purely fictitious or something he gleaned from stuff from outside. Um, I don't think there was any sort of mystical uh, magic or anything going on, but that might just be the cynical doubter in me.
I honestly hadn't even really considered astral projection as a potential for what was going on because at least maybe this is just my fault for when I think of Lovecraftian horror is I tend to lean towards incoming psychic energy rather than outgoing, and or at least when it comes to the human characters. So I just never even thought of it as a possibility. I mean, it certainly is the way it's written, but I would tend to lean towards hallucination or he actually got in over astral projection. Just that might just be my bias, though. Um, because like a lot of hypersensitivity stuff, because he says hypersensitivity, like VS Drake said, that leads me to believe the sensitivity. I think sensor. That's incoming information. That's not an an ability to go out and gather that information. That's the information's incoming, but it's not to say that he doesn't have that ability because you often see in uh, the mythos of that sort of ability, astral projection does overlap with it quite a bit in some cases. I've just never associated it with Lovecraft so much as I might with closer to um, certain spiritual uh, practices, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let me move the conversation on a little bit here and ask you this: what do you think wasn't so great about the tomb?
Well, I know I touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but I thought the writing of it is a little bit pretentious. It's it's from the beginning assuming that you either agree with me or you're dumb or don't have this capacity that I do. It and it does so even while throughout the book he questions his own ability to uh, assess his own sanity, which I think is hypocritical in and of itself. You know, he starts off by saying something along the lines of, "While I realize that in my current position, this might undermine my telling of the story as being factual," and then what? Less than 10 minutes later, if you're listening to the audiobook, he's just like talking about how I saw this thing, kind of, maybe, I'm not sure. But anyways, we'll assume it's real, and then just moves on.
It's totally there.
A lot of that also tends to lean into the word choices because even for the day and age when this was produced, when that kind of language was more commonplace, it was definitely a sign that you were part of the literary elite, uh, that you would use language like that. And he doesn't shy away from it whatsoever. And I don't think that it would be that commonly relatable to the layperson back then. Maybe if you were a big reader or, uh, part of the well-educated, fine, but he doesn't even make an attempt to reach out to those who might not be. So I thought
Yeah.
that was my biggest issue with it. I mean, it's a short story, so it's not like there was a lot of space for that, especially if you want to keep the tone similar. But yeah.
Yeah.
And what about you, Adam? What was your biggest
My
issue
biggest
with the book?
nitpick.
Yeah.
For me, this we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I didn't find the book super relatable. You've got that aspect about it of uh, curiosity, right? The what's behind door number one kind of curiosity that kind of pulls you in a little bit, but the rest of the story I just couldn't resonate with. Like the song he sings at breakfast, I think was supposed to be this big hitting moment where it was like, I'm insane, look how crazy I am and stuff. And for me it's got some neat points in the song, but like I don't know, it didn't sing to me. And if this was like a prologue for a larger story, I don't think I would continue the story. So I don't know. That's just my take on it.
I think VS Drake had a good point about it being in first person. That means that it's harder to get into it if you can't very directly relate to it. So if you can't very directly relate to it, and in a first person story, you're trying to you're almost literally trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah,
And if you can't relate to that person, then especially when they're the only character realistically in this story. But VS Drake also mentioned that he had an issue with the lack of conflict between the character and basically anybody else. But I don't think that was ever the intention of the book. I can see it as certainly a criticism. You want tension there, but I think the tension for this was intended to be between the person and his own psyche. Like that
yeah,
was realistically, I think, and whatever is beyond. Those are the tension. It was never meant to be a conflict between man versus society or man. It was all man versus self or man versus reality. I think what are the main ones that it pulled on. Maybe man versus God a little bit with the whole death thing, but I think it's a little more leaning towards the reality part. But if that's something that you don't like, that's a totally valid criticism too,
yeah,
because if you're looking for something that has a little more interpersonal conflict, then this is definitely not the book for you. Because what his only interactions with other people are when he vaguely talks about um, how his family kept him from society, and he vaguely talks about him being hauled away to an insane asylum. So
yeah.
that's about it.
And to answer VS Drake's question, uh, what was the quality of story versus the amount written? For me, H.P. Lovecraft does. I do have to say he is a phenomenal short story writer. He can make it seem like there's fluff when there's zero fluff, and he can give a detailed accounting of a world without it taking 6 pages, right? He can
Yeah.
give you everything in one page. So um, I think a lot of that's like the complex way he describes things. He kind of just states it. He doesn't dance around things. He just kind of says that wall is black. So
Well, when you think about it, at least from what I've read, a lot of his tellings are essentially from first person. So how do we experience the world? When we're in the moment experiencing it, it does tend to be, yeah, that wall is black, or the sun is yellow, or it's raining outside. It's not a lot of beating around the bush. We don't immediately experience the world, at least not through sensation in metaphor. And he doesn't really do a lot of that except when it helps elaborate, I think, emotionally on top of what he is physically describing, which I think he does an excellent job of. I have to say, I'm actually typically not a big horror reader because most horror, at least for me, is fairly predictable. And H.P. Lovecraft is the opposite of that. So I enjoy his work, and this is no exception. Um, I also, while I have read short stories, have a hard time getting into them. This this one I really didn't, again, because he kind of, I think, like Adam said at the very beginning, kind of smacks you in the face with what he's doing. And Muse Library brings up a good point. He avoids extraordinarily flowery writing, and that, to your point, Adam, and Muse Library's point, it cuts down on anything unnecessary for storytelling in a short story, which you have to be able to do to be able to move a plot along in such a short amount of time. And I think his ability to make it vivid while being efficient and constrained is excellent. And it's something that I think for people who like short stories, it's definitely worth a read and a listen.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a thought I just had too right now, riffing off of what you were talking about and what Muse Library said there. Is, if he describes something in his book, it's important. He doesn't describe something that doesn't have a point in the book. So something that I kind of just thought of is he did go into detail about like the archway over the tomb, and I was just like, wait, he did describe that. What did I miss? Why was that important for him to describe? What about the story did I miss? So I think that's a Lovecraft trait, is he describes it, it's important, pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think actually bringing up the point that you mentioned earlier on, when he doesn't describe it in detail, he uses that intentionally, in that he wants to not only draw your focus, but he is drawing you into this idea of what the focus of the main character is as well. And so it's not just, I don't want to mention this, so I'm not going to. It's, I'm deliberately not mentioning this in detail because the main character didn't view it in detail.
Yeah.
So even the stuff like that serves a purpose, which is impressive.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we are getting close to wrap up time here. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss about this book, or anybody in the chat section? Is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
Muse Library brought up that it's, through his writing, he's kind of putting horse blinders on the reader. A little bit, yeah. I think it does kind of skew your vision to what he wants you to look at. But I think one of the key bits is that I like that Muse Library used horse blinders as the example, because it gets very easy to railroad a reader, put them into a tunnel and say, this is where you're going. But he still allows you to kind of look around. It's just, it's going to be limited based on what he wants you to see, those little blinders. And I personally really like that. Thanks for bringing that up, Muse Library. And what about you, Adam? Anything else that you want to bring up?
I think we've fleshed this out pretty good. Something that we haven't talked about yet, though, is other books that are of similar mind to this.
Well, obviously you have to bring in other works by H.P. Lovecraft, because you can't not mention them, because this is more or less the progenitor of his next works, because I think it was like his second published work ever. It really sets the tone for his future works, and this fascination with death and madness, and going that next step from curiosity to the line between madness and reality. And so Dagon, Rise of Cthulhu are like his next main works that I really think are very similar. And also, one of the things that I actually looked up is H.P. Lovecraft was indeed heavily influenced by Edgar Allan Poe. So you want to talk about like poetic stories, like I know The Raven is technically poetry, but his poetry still tells a story, and it tells it in a very similar way. Not just the darkness of it, but this ability to use language to paint a picture that is vivid but not um, overly overly written to the point where there's fluff in it. Like being concise while being articulate about the picture that you're painting is another commonality between them. And not to mention the surrealism, this juxtaposition between what is reality and what isn't, how nature, both of ourselves and the nature around us, tend to clash in these very dark moments.
Yeah.
So, what about you? Anything you could come up with as far as similar books, Adam?
I think you really nailed it on the head there. HP is HP, and his books really follow that kind of same theme there. I haven't read Dagon, but I have done the Rise of Cthulhu, and I gotta agree, it does have that same kind of feel to it.
One of the other ones, actually, now that comes to mind, I just thought about this, is I've seen some similarities with even when I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Mostly when I think about those descriptions of like the deep, dark underbelly is, again, that clash with nature, that the descriptions being what they are. I think that'd be another one that kind of has, at least parts of it have similar vibes. There's obviously parts that are very different, but
very different descriptive style, though.
Yeah, I'm true. It just kind of made me think about like when they both describe these dark places that we become fascinated with, those descriptions tend to be fairly similar, or at least the realistic parts of it. Obviously, the more mythological parts are very different, but
yeah. Well, why don't we call that a wrap and get to where we're going next? Sound good to you?
Sounds good to me. And thank you all very much for your participation in the chat today. We hope to see more of that in the future.
Yes, definitely. So as we mentioned at the beginning of the stream, our Patreon members get to vote on a book list that we generate based on recommendations and our own feelings about books. And that voting has ended for our next short novel. The winner is The President's Brain is Missing by John Scalzi. We'll be doing that on December 19th at 8 p.m. It'll always be 8 p.m. The 800's at 8. So that's another short story. Pick that up and join us on December 19th at 8 p.m. But before, don't forget that we're going to also be doing The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I am typing, so that's why I am sounding silly. That's going to be on December 5th, also at 8 p.m.
Right.
So that book's a little bit longer than these short novellas. I think audio-wise, it's in like the 30-ish hour range.
I think just shy of 30, like 28 and change.
Yeah, somewhere in there. But it's a great book. Both Alex and I have listened to it before. Highly recommend it. I've read it in paperback form. It's great in any format. So check it out. You got 2 weeks if you haven't started yet.
Still plenty of time.
Yeah.
And definitely. It's an enjoyable read, so it's one that you can get through pretty quickly if you want to, or have the time to sit aside to actually physically read it. If you are listening to audio, I highly recommend the Audible version. The person who reads it. I believe Adam, you remember the name of
It's
the
Nick Podell.
Nick Podell does an amazing job of bringing the characters to life. So, yeah, please get started if you haven't already, and we look forward to having that discussion with you.
Yes. So again, just to reiterate, Name of the Wind on December 5th, and The President's Brain is Missing on December 19th. Also, check out our YouTube channel for other videos like this, as well as some other projects that we've done in the past. If you want to vote on books or see some other cool behind-the-scene things from our podcast, Roll with Advantage, check us out at patreon.com/DMsTable. The link's at the bottom of your screen. Also, we talk about books a lot, not just on the stream, but in chat form on Discord. If you hit us up on our Twitter or Facebook, we can DM you the link to join us there. You'll get a lot more opportunities to talk nerd with us and have some cool conversations. Everything that you could ever want to know about us is on dmstable.com. That's our essentially parent company. So check dmstable.com out for some more cool nerdy things. And last but not least, our socials. On Facebook, we're at the DMs Table, and on Twitter, we're at DMs Table. So give us a shout out, and we'll shout right back at you. So once again, thank you for listening to us talk and joining us in with your comments. And we hope to have a lot more fun with you guys in the future.
Yeah, thank you all again for staying with us, particularly with our technical difficulties in the beginning. For those of you who stuck through with that, that's awesome. Also, for those of you who are active in the chat, if you think of books that you would like to be on our list for consideration for the Patreon, you can hit us up again at our socials to get the Discord, and you can give us ideas there or in the chat during our streams. Just wanted to bring that up for next time.
Or just add us on Twitter or Facebook, and
that works too.
Give us your recommendation there.
Yeah, we'd love to have it for our list. All right, thanks again, everybody, and have a great night.
Yeah, thanks.